Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day today, and welcome to our webinar on protecting your kids from cyberbullying. I'm Lisa Plaggemier, the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We have put together a few web pages and a kit full of all kinds of great stuff to raise awareness of the problem of cyberbullying. For today's children, the internet is an almost all-encompassing aspect of life. But meanwhile, cyberbullying is also a growing problem across the world. The internet's faceless, anonymous, and efficient nature is appealing to a bully's desire to intimidate. So that's one of the reasons we've put together this campaign and this toolkit today. If you navigate to our homepage, which is StaySafeOnline.org, you'll see a box there toward the top that'll take you directly to the webpage that was on the last slide that shows everything that we've got available in the toolkit. Lee, if you want to go back to the next slide. So in the toolkit, you will find, next slide, I think. So there's a PDF tip sheet for parents, educators, kids, and teens. So no matter who you are, we've got information to help you with this. What you're looking at now is a really handy flow chart, which is also a PDF. There's social media graphics and sample posts to use on social media. On the next slide, you can see some of the tip sheets that we've got. And again, there's tip sheets aimed at parents and educators, and then tip sheets aimed at younger children and teenagers. And what you see there in the very center is an infographic that we've put together on cyberbullying. So whether you're a parent or somebody running a training and awareness program in your organization, and you've got parents, of course, that work in your organization that would benefit from this, we encourage you to make use of our kit. The next slide shows some of the social media posts that we put together. Those are some of the graphics. Those are available in the kit as well. So again, if you go to StaySafeOnline.org, on the homepage, you'll see a box about cyberbullying. If you click on that, that'll get you to the download where you can get access to all of the different resources that we just walked you through. Now I'm going to be joined by a good friend of mine, John Haynes, and he's from Dell. And he has a story to tell about how this affected his life. Hi, John. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in what is an incredibly important topic as we think about our young people and the challenges that they face today in this kind of modern world. Cybersecurity and cyberbullying is personal, very personal to me, because in 2012, I actually lost a daughter to suicide as a result of what was a cyberbullying incident. It involved, in our story, it evolved around a dishonest relationship. Then you enter the third party that was communicating with my daughter, and just a really cruel, mean-spirited, you name it. This is the G version, I'm telling, but in that kind of way. And it was all done using technology in cyberspace. And that put my daughter into a place of despair that she had never experienced before. And as a result, we lost her that day. I think when most of us growing up, when we think about bullying, we think about that activity taking place kind of at school, in person. When you left school, you could kind of get away from the problems. And as we all know, with the advances in technology and the way that we're all connected, enter cyberbullying. And it has become its own phenomena, so to speak. So it's 24/7. It can reach out anywhere, as we know, anytime. And it just puts an incredible amount of stress and anxiety on our young people. So in the aftermath of losing my daughter, Madeline, my wife and I, along with some really good friends, we started a nonprofit, and it's called the Sandbox at Madeline's Place. And it's the mission is pretty simple. It's to help teens navigate through adolescence with a healthy sense of self and who they are and what they do. We offer a host of programs to help them in that or through those years in that space. So we have after-school programs. We offer free tutoring. We always feed them dinner. We have a place, a physical place where they can come and just be. So if the artists want to do artwork, we have a place for that. If the musicians want to play music, we have a place for that. If the kids just need to burn off some energy, we have a great backyard, for that. We do have a teen suicide awareness training course that we do a couple of times a semester. We scholarship as many seniors as we can who are going to go on to college and or trade school and who meet certain criteria. Our motto is be honest, be kind, and speak up. And we just really try to talk to the kids about honesty in their relationships, kindness in their communication, especially in social media and in cyberspace, and then speak up for themselves or for each other if somebody's in a position where they can't. And we do, as you might imagine, we do spend a fair amount of time talking to them about being safe in cyberspace, and actually spend a fair amount of time talking about cyberbullying and to be cognizant of that. And one of the is we do this little exercise with them where we'll get about 10 teens and we kind of put them in a circle, and we've got 4 or 5 balls of yarn, and they hold the string and they start throwing the balls of yarn back and forth until they have a real spider web in place. And then we tell them each string represents a cruel text, a picture, something negative that you now want to get back. So go and untangle that mess that's in front of you now, because once you hit that send button and it's gone, it is really tough to pull that back. And so, so we've, I think we're making strides. There's always work to be done with these kids, but that's why I think this topic is so important. And again, really appreciate you pulling this panel together and highlighting this problem that we have. So thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for sharing your story with us, John. So I introduced John as my friend, but his title is actually Senior Director of Protective Intelligence and Operations for Dell Technologies, as well as being the founder of the Sandbox at Madeline's Place. Now we'd like to have our other panelists join. So in addition to John Haynes, we have John Simone, also from Dell Technologies. He is the President and Chief Security Officer. Kevin Roundy, Senior Technical Director, Researcher at Norton LifeLock, and Phil Cutler, the Chief Executive Officer for Paper. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
So let's get started. We're going to have a short conversation here. And if you're in the audience today, I want you to have your questions ready, because we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. John, let's start with you. As someone, John Haynes, that is, as someone who has started an organization to tackle cyberbullying locally, what have you learned from the kids that participate, specifically as it relates to their understanding of cyberbullying?
Yeah, I think, at least in my experience, when you broach the subject with the teens, you get a lot of head nods. They've heard the term, they understand what you're talking about. They know fundamentally, what it means to be mean or cruel in cyberspace versus uplifting or positive. So So they definitely get it. I think where whether or not it's ingrained is the question. I think I think that frontal lobe that isn't quite fully developed yet, they forget. And so, or they may get caught up in a moment, or the peer pressure will grab them. And next thing you know, they're doing some things or making decisions that aren't healthy or positive for them or others.
So once they might recognize it, realize what it is that's happening, if they can connect those dots, how likely are they to actually report it to a trusted adult or a school?
Yeah, I think that depends on whether or not they have trusted adults in their life. If they do, whether it's parents, or somebody else in the household, or it could be a teacher or a religious leader or whomever that may be, if they have that connection with somebody, then I think the likelihood that they would recognize, hey, what I'm seeing, what I'm being asked to participate is wrong, or I just don't have a good feeling about this, and they get that trusted adult involved. Those who don't have that relationship with a trusted adult, I think are far less likely to report it, even if if they know that what's going on in front of them is wrong. They have more difficulty taking that step and reaching out and again pulling in that trusted adult.
That's one of the things we tackle in that infographic with the flow chart is who to report or what to report and who to report to, because there are situations when you might want to involve somebody in authority, as opposed to depending on where it happened, what kind of cyberbullying was, how serious are the threats that are being made, to kind of help kids judge how to escalate those situations, because certainly those situations can really vary. Kevin, there's a recent study that Norton commissioned of mental health professionals. 89% agree that cyberbullying is more detrimental to mental health than in-person bullying because it has the capacity to be seen by an exponentially greater number of witnesses, as it's documented and can live online forever, which most kids, as John explained, don't, that isn't necessarily something that they really comprehend. Are there any other findings you can share about the impact of cyberbullying? And we'll put the link to that study or a blog about that study in the chat for everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So yeah, that's an interesting statistic, right? Like nearly 90% of health professionals recognizing that online cyberbullying can be worse because maybe of the potential for things to go viral, right? And again, it being like a constant source of bullying that doesn't go away. And I think, our kids don't really think about that, like you say, and it's the professionals that realize this. The kids are just spending time online and not realizing it, right? The average American spends 11 hours a day staring into a phone. And, if you're not having conversations with your kids about how they're using their phone, they're going to be exposed to all sorts of horrible things that you're not aware of. I remember when TikTok was new and my daughter got her first phone, I started to, we had a little bit of tracking that told us she spent 9 hours on TikTok in one day. And so it was like, all right, there's a big problem here, right? But if we hadn't been having conversations with her and these things, we wouldn't have realized those things. And so, I think it's 27% of teens in our study, we found that reported they had been cyberbullied at some point in their lifetimes. And with every click, and every interaction, there's just more opportunities for bad things to happen. And it has a toll on mental health. The types of symptoms that people report are anxiety, and 80% of the time, depression, paranoia, and many others. That's just for cybercrime in general. So obviously, cyberbullying, the intent is to cause mental anxiety. So you can just imagine how bad that can be, as John mentioned. I'd say, I think we've done research as well, showing that for people in belong to minority groups or even just females in general, when they go onto online streaming platforms, they're just subjected to torrents of abuse that Caucasian males don't have to deal with, right? So it's important to just kind of be aware of what's happening, be aware of how bad the environments can be online, and have those conversations with our kids and keep them away from the things that can really get things to spiral out of control in a really bad way. So like 1 in 5 teens report sending nude or semi-nude pictures to people online. Like that's exactly the kind of thing that can spiral out of control and that you can't take back and you lose control over. And even kids who might be receiving such those kinds of images probably don't realize that that's considered child pornography and can result in criminal charges. So it's important to have conversations with our kids and really make them aware of the dangers of the things that they can experience online.
John, Simone, can you talk to us about the intersection of cybersecurity and cyberbullying? When I was a kid, you could run home. You could physically get away from the bully. And that's just not really the case anymore, is it?
No, definitely. I mean, John Haynes pointing out the notion of just bullying happening in school and where and when to look for it, and then you're done and safe. The internet flips everything on its head, pretty much like every other element of our life, for good, but also for bad in some cases. So first, thanks for having us join this really important conversation and for the work your organization's doing. A deep thank you and appreciation. And thanks to everybody for joining and attending, taking the time. I mean, that's one of the big things from my perspective is investing the time and focus to play an active role in tackling these issues, which starts with awareness, but then actually involves engaging with either your own children or those that you have caretaking responsibilities for. And security is a part of it. Sometimes I think it's difficult to differentiate between security and fraud or bullying and general cyber safety. All of these things do interrelate to one another. The reality is that cyberbullying can be performed and often involves security issues, whether it's unauthorized access to kids' devices or breaking into their accounts, or getting access to their email or their information. And oftentimes this exacerbates whatever fraud is taking place. Sometimes, and often it does start with social engineering, essentially tricking children into to falling for things that they believe to be real that isn't, whether it be through phishing and getting them to click on text message links or email attachments and links, or just simply tricking them into sending pictures of themselves, which horribly is happening at really shocking rates. When I think about some of the security best practices that families can help teach their children about and help ensure get enacted, I think first and foremost about password management. It's still, as simple as it is, it's still one of the things that ends up causing some of the most significant issues, where people either choose the same password for multiple accounts. It's really important to use unique passwords that are different everywhere, which historically used to be impossible. But nowadays we have great password managers, whether it's LastPass or Dashlane or anything else, where you literally can have a different password on every different account that you use, and that's really important. But also moving beyond passwords and for services that allow you to enable multi-factor authentication, whether it be getting a text message or some other means beyond just the password to make sure it's you when you're logging into something. Most popular sites and accounts now have multi-factor authentication options. They're really easy to turn on and use, and they're really impactful. You start then thinking, though, about other ways that people can get into accounts, like the secret questions that we all select. What was your first pet? What was your favorite childhood friends growing up? Those things actually aren't too difficult to either guess or figure out. And so just being thoughtful about, even if you have the strongest password and it's unique, if your secret questions are actually easy to know or guess, then your account really isn't secure. And oftentimes that can be overlooked. And also nowadays we see people giving account access via third-party applications. And so when you click that allow this third-party app, that's another common way to get in. So all of these things, I think, would fall under the umbrella of general cyber hygiene, but they could become sources through which abuse can become manifested, and beyond just stopping crime, also can become essential to getting in the way of stopping cyberbullying. The only other element I'd call out when I think about the topic is just that, one of the unique elements of the internet that I think really exacerbates and inflames the situation is this anonymity, and it's so easy to do something harmful or nasty when you're doing it anonymously. I think psychologists have shown the likelihood that people may be making a bad choice with the anonymity of the internet really desensitizes you. And we often think about this through the lens of our children and kids, but I often also think about it through the lens of adults and parents. I mean, if we think about the internet, like how desensitized have we really become? You could look at it like the largest, best, greatest mall in the history of humankind, right? It has bookstores with millions of books, places to go and meet friends and distant relatives. You can get any food you want, you can get any gift you want. But it's also a mall that has, the largest adult video store, brothels, drug dealers, suicide clinics, self-harm challenges, murder for hire. And in the case of today's discussion, the ability for people to bully and harass you anonymously, regardless of what hallway you're walking down. And on top of that, we have marketers that would jump out and, it's no longer just perfume. Like, do you want to try to smell this perfume? It's literally like come into this awful store or experience. And if that mall really existed in real life, would we as adults be letting our children just roam the mall whenever they want, unsupervised, at night after they go to bed, with their device? And the reality isn't too different. That is essentially what's happening with the lack of oversight and really an active role in children's lives on the internet. And playing a proactive role in protecting them, I think, is really essential given the nature of what we're dealing with.
I love that analogy of the mall. That brings it home to those of us that are old school and need an analogy of something physical to imagine the cyber world. But you bring up a good point about your kid, going to bed with their phone or their device. We did a webinar, a recorded webinar that's on our website still about for parents, and we interviewed 2 technologists, and both of them said that they don't allow their children to use any technology in a part of the house that isn't public. So the kids have to be at the kitchen table or in the family room, and they can't be just alone in the privacy of their own room, potentially doing things online going places online that they shouldn't be. One of the other things I can recommend for people in the audience today is we have a page on our website. I think Lee or Jen, you can put that in the chat, that talks about how to tweak your settings on all the popular apps. So your security and privacy settings. That's another thing that's really, really important in social media, is knowing who can see your posts and just controlling your, your privacy there. Phil, as someone who needs
one call out on that front, Lisa, I would say, is going back to sort of what are the adults' responsibilities. I often see a lot of discussion around how should I securely configure my child's device or my child's Facebook account. But even as parents or adults or the caretakers, often I don't see the same attention being placed on the adult accounts, yet all the same information, if not sometimes more, is available about children on parents' accounts, and yet they get limited attention in terms of the risk that those accounts may present to information about their children. So I think that's another oversight I see commonly. That's one that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. Pardon me. Phil, as someone who leads an organization supporting youth and focused on cybersecurity and student safety, what can schools be doing to combat cyberbullying and encourage students to report?
Well, Lisa, I'll echo comments made earlier by the other panelists. I think this is such an important conversation to be having, and timely as well. I think cyberbullying is something that's not new, unfortunately, but definitely growing, and we're seeing it. Paper partners with school districts coast to coast. We support almost 3 million students around the nation. And we work really closely with a lot of these school districts. And one of the things that's become really apparent to us is a lot of these districts are very well prepared to deal with issues that happen in school. That traditional bullying that you said, you could run home from, that type of thing. But often they're ill-equipped to be supporting what's happening outside of the school. And they know that it's taking place, but from a resource perspective, they don't all have the resources to train and be prepared for incidents that are happening outside of the school, the 4 walls of the school. And that's something that we've definitely seen has popped up particularly with some of the mega districts. The largest districts in the country have the resources to do this. But generally speaking, that represents a small number of districts. Most of the districts don't have that support in-house. And so one thing that we realized, and we've seen an increase for those in our audience who aren't familiar with Paper, we're an academic assistance platform that provides students with chat-based tutoring. So students can come on and get support, and it's available free through their school district. So we partner with the districts. And one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years has been an increased rate of students coming on and reporting these types of situations, whether it's cyberbullying or just, feeling uncomfortable or uneasy about other things happening in their lives on our platform. And this comes back to John's earlier point about, we'll encourage students to report the issues to a trusted adult. Well, oftentimes Paper is viewed as that trusted adult, but we're not there in the student's life physically, right? We're a resource that they rely on. So we're often put in a position where we'll report it immediately to the school district, and they may not have the resources set up to address these things in a timely manner. And because of that, we realized that there needs to be sort of a cadence put in place to support these districts. So we established a Department of Student Health and Safety last year that was really intended to support those districts and say, hey, this thing has happened and we're going to help you deal with it, because it's such an important issue. It's something that we can't ignore. It really is easy to sweep these things under the rug if you're an institution that's operating in person. And again, our schools have had to evolve quite a bit over the last couple of years because of the pandemic, but these are not pandemic related issues. Cyberbullying has been around long before that. We're trying to help them recognize that action needs to be taken immediately. And the longer that you wait, some of this grooming, some of these things they develop more and more and more. And so the minute a student or a child is taking action and bringing this forward to an adult, generally speaking, there's something there that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed really quickly. And so our view is that despite the fact we're not necessarily there in the school with the students, we play a role in making sure that those teachers and the counselors in the district in general, even if they don't have the resources, we can give them the resources to deal with this.
Well, we've got some questions coming in. So why don't we start with those and just see where the conversation takes us. One question: how young do we start talking about cyber safety with children? My second grader is next to never online, and when she's in the classroom, it's very limited access and applications. Is it appropriate to talk about this even now? Again, that's a woman with a second grader who's asking that question. How is it? Can you be too young to start having this conversation?
I've never heard anybody regretting talking to their kids too early about internet safety, but I've heard a tremendous number of heartbreaking stories about people waiting too long. And I've encountered cases as well, even just in my local community, where there's children that don't have phones, they don't even have internet access at home, but they might be at a camp or in a art class or something else, and there's a kid in the classroom who was given a phone or something at a very early age and brought up content and exposed the other children or started exposing them to something that the parents never would have even imagined they would have the ability to have access to. So those are some things I think to consider when thinking about what the right age appropriate conversation is. But I think it's also about continuity. It's not a one-time conversation. There's probably a way to have a conversation. When I have a daughter in first grade, that conversation is very different than my daughter who's in sixth grade, right? In terms of just how you have it. And I think the right answer will sit with each parent or caretaker and knowing what the right balance is. But I would encourage early and often conversations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think you want to talk to them before they already start to set up bad patterns, that are going to be repeated. So, password safety is one that John mentioned earlier. I think, it's very common for kids to share passwords. Like, for example, a lot of them get on Snapchat where they're rewarded for having streaks. And then if they're going on vacation, they'll tell their friends like, hey, here's my password. Can you log in and continue all my streaks for me? Right? You'd never think that your kid would do something like that, and that they would think, they don't think through the implications of these things, right? And then most likely they share that they use that same password with all of their other online accounts, right? And they might not be friends with that person in a year. So, I think it's really important to get started early. We did a partnership with the PTA called Smart Talk with your kids, and it's an encouragement to talk with your kids early. I've got 4 girls of different ages, and I think it was really helpful I started with the younger ones earlier than I did with the older ones. And I think the older ones are maybe a little more set in their bad ways in some sense, so with the passwords and, it's important to introduce them to these tools and do it early, because they always surprise you with what they're doing as soon as they get their hands on a device.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate the point that you may not have the technology in your own home, but more than likely they're going to be exposed somewhere else. Like John said, either at a camp or more than likely just at a friend's house somewhere. So yeah, I totally agree. Having those conversations sooner rather than later and repeatedly, super important.
And to that point, over 85% of elementary schools in the US provide their students with devices. So they may not be getting access from a device provided at home, but they are using devices in the classroom. Again, hopefully that's well supervised, but not necessarily always the case. So regardless whether they have a device at home, they're likely using one at school.
So we had a question come in, kind of a comment and a question. Cyberbullying can feel more pervasive because it doesn't end when a child leaves school. Bullying that happens in school can carry over to digital spaces like Instagram and vice versa. Teens don't see a divide between physical and digital worlds as adults do. How can we, educators and parents, lost the question, make them be aware of that? So here's a question. Does it really matter if it's in person or online? I mean, it is a blurred world these days, especially if you ask the people at Meta. It's going to get even more blurred. Should we be treating those situations differently in any way? Do the kids necessarily need to be aware of the divide between the physical and the virtual world?
I'll kick it off, Lisa. I mean, just one person's opinion, but I think while those lines can be blurred in many ways, that there is a difference. And Kevin alluded to this earlier, is that, in the physical world, the bullying or the behavior, you can physically walk away from it at some point. You can create that separation. In the cyber world, oftentimes you can't, unless you're turning off your device or getting out of all social media or all technology altogether. So I think it's super important that when we have conversations with our young people, that we make that point and reiterate that point, that if you are if you find yourself a victim of cyberbullying, that needs to, you need to, as a parent or teacher, whomever, you need to let me know so that we can properly address it together. And I think for those who might be tempted to engage in activity, that they fully understand that it's not pretend. There are real consequences on the other end of that message, and you have no idea what the other person is dealing with at the time you send that bullying message. So I think I think we should be talking to our young people about those differences and showing how that they can impact people differently, in the physical world and in the cyberspace.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. I think, cyberbullying is interesting because it can be, if the bullying is happening from someone that your child knows in the physical world, can be a window into abuse that's happening at school or in other environments in the physical world as well that you wouldn't know about otherwise, right? I think it's important for you to have conversations with your kids in an expectation that you're going to borrow their phone sometimes and just check up on them that way. And that could be a window into what's happening in the physical world. And I think another thing that's different is, a lot of kids they see all these influencers online and they have like a dream in their head, I'm going to be an influencer too. And they start posting videos on YouTube and, or putting public facing content on their profiles. And now there's subject not just to the people in their community and the people in their friend group or the people in their grade who might generally be kind of nice and respectful, but to the broader world on the internet where there's all sorts of nasty people and predators and things like that. And so it's different in that respect, in that they're just opened up to the kind of toxic cesspool that can exist out on the internet if they really try to open their information to people in general. And it's hard for kids to really understand how bad that can be without, you really having a meaningful conversation with them.
Well, we're getting a few questions here that are, Phil, I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you have a comment?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think in a lot of cases when there's physical bullying that takes place, most children are relatively well conditioned to report that immediately and take action on it when something's happening. I think we need to take that behavior and help it extend to what's happening online with some of the cyberbullying and sort of build that muscle memory, in a sense that when you see these things happening, right, maybe it's not even to yourself, maybe it's to somebody else, a classmate, a friend, whoever, report those things and bring that up the same way you would if it was happening physically. I think that is a good behavior to instill.
We have a few questions here that are veering into the parental monitoring or digital forensics, I think. Here. We have one attendee who's asking, how can you close an account, for example, TikTok or Snapchat, if a kid at age 10, in other words, younger than the age they're supposed to be, has set them up? And what if you don't know what accounts your child has, and you want to be able to take some authority over that and close those accounts? Any tips for parents there?
I would just really highlight that most of the large, these are massive companies with hundreds of billions, not $1 trillion plus, capital structures, and they put a lot of time and energy into enabling tools for parents and adults that are engaged to set up this technology to be more safe and secure to use. But oftentimes those capabilities aren't leveraged. And so there's always the cases of one-off websites and smaller sort of emerging applications. But almost all, as I'm looking in the chat and I'm looking at all these, whether it's Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, all of the different subsidiary apps they're owned, there's extensive privacy settings. I see the link in the chat, which I just encourage adults and caretakers to be engaged. And it starts, I think, with having, whatever your ecosystem of choice is, using the family settings, which provide a fabric usually through all these services, where if you set up a family, it enables the parents to play a role in what's allowed and what's not, if not using some third-party software, which is out there for parental control. And then going all the way through, I think, the communications and cultural elements with the children, just setting the expectation that, this is a very, very dangerous, model that has an incredible opportunity to do good and enable our lives to be better, and to promote learning and, good social development, but there's a lot of harm that can come from it. And so we as adults are going to play an active role. We have a responsibility to do that, just as if in the physical world they were going out into an unsafe place. But I do think there's plenty of technology and technology solutions that enable that active role to reduce a lot of the risk in this space, as long as parents are willing to get educated on and then take the time to enable it and use it. And 98% of the time it's free. It's not something you have to pay for. It's really just getting acquainted with it and setting it up right.
Yeah, similarly, another parent is asking if there are any apps or tools where you can actually see what your child is doing online in real time. I don't know about the real time piece of it, but there are certainly parental monitoring tools available.
There are, Lisa, actually. Some of the apps that John was referencing gives parents full control over the device. So the student or their child can't download an app, can't send a text message, can't do anything either without their permission, or they have the capability to see every keystroke that they they make.
What path can a parent take if the school is not doing what they should in a situation like this?
I think that it can be really tricky. If the school is not stepping up and addressing it, it could put a parent in a really challenging situation. Oftentimes, my recommendation in a situation like this would be to continue to elevate the conversation within the school, right? So if the teacher is not taking action, bring it to the principal. If the principal is not taking action, perhaps bring it to the district administration, superintendent, counselors. The more people that are aware of the situation, the better, because the likelihood of somebody taking action and taking it seriously is higher. Again, there are circumstances we've heard of where schools haven't really taken the action. There are, the outcome may not be good, and we don't want that to happen. So the more noise that's being made, the better. I definitely would recommend, though, elevating the conversation. If you're not getting the response that you feel is necessary for a situation like this, go from a teacher to principal, counselors, eventually to the superintendent or even the board if you need to.
Thanks for that. One more question. And no matter, I can speak from experience, no matter how uncomfortable that can be. My daughter was in a bullying situation a number of years ago that I eventually had to escalate to a board member. There is some aspect of cyberbullying where a teen is more willing to listen to their friends than their parents, sometimes due to having a higher matter of importance to the child. How do you handle a teen that is more willing to listen to their friends than their parents? This is a pretty broad question, but I think not uncommon. We've probably all of us who are parents experienced that. Any words of wisdom there for that parent?
Well, Lisa, I don't know, how applicable this is like across the board, but through the Sandbox at Madeline's place, I mean, we have those discussions with the teens in group settings, and we've been doing that for 10 years now. So it's not so the point is that if you can get the teens thinking about it in a similar way, if they are talking about it together, there's hopefully somewhat of a support mechanism or a support group now in place. So if one starts to go down that negative path, that somebody within their peer group will pull them back and say, oh, no, remember, that's not what we do around here. We know that can cause a lot of problems. Because I agree, any parent can agree that, sometimes our kids, they hear us talking and it's like, rah, rah, rah. It's just background noise. But if somebody else says the same thing, all of a sudden, oh, okay, yeah, I get that. So, we try to do it in groups of teens, and hopefully can drive some positive, positive message in that way.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of options for trusted adults in a kid's life, right? It could be a coach, it could be a teacher, it could be a school counselor, it could be a youth minister or somebody at a place of worship. It doesn't have to come from you. It can come from another adult, and sometimes they'll listen to, as John said, they'll listen to the other person more than they're likely to listen to you. Any other tips? Maybe we'll go around the virtual horn here. And a few parents that have chimed in looking for just tips on how to have these conversations, some best practices on how to talk to your kids about this. And I really like John Simone, the shopping mall example. Have you used that with your kids, or do you talk about it in a different way?
No, my kids have no idea what a mall is, so that was mostly for this audience. But I mean, it gets to the point of conversation with my first grader is different than a conversation with my sixth grader, and I think the right answer is going to be different for different parents and different family structures. But I would say I know a lot of colleagues and other parents where like drinking and driving. There's these elements that are just life and death, life altering things that you worry about on your kid's behalf. And, they set up amnesty programs essentially. And they said, listen, if you find yourself in a situation, like in any other situation, I would ground your butt forever if I found you drinking at 15 or whatever. But if it's a situation where you're stuck and you need a ride, you make this call, and I'm not going to ask you a single question. We're never going to talk about it again, but I'm going to drive you home safely. And I think, having those constructs, whether it's you or another trusted adult, where people realize the severity of how, tremendously lives can be impacted, whether it's, cyberbullying and suicidal ideation and all the other harms that come from, this internet, parentally shielded internet exposure that our children have. I think it's really important to hit those things head on and have some sort of outlet, other than assuming that they're going to have a friend who's going to do the right thing on their behalf, which is not a bet, you want to take when your kids' lives are at stake. And just, there's a different golden rule nowadays, right? The golden rule is you can't do or say anything online that, you wouldn't be happy with us, your parents seeing, with your teacher seeing, with your grandparents seeing, with your future employer seeing, with your future spouse seeing, with your future kids seeing, and just really trying to get them to soak in the gravity of that. And I think realistically, sharing age appropriate examples that are real examples that are heartbreaking, that bring this to a degree of realism that maybe they haven't experienced, thankfully, in their lives thus far. But you can bring forward real examples to say, this isn't kind of, the only thing worse than being a pastor's daughter is being a CSO's daughter. Your dad's the head of security. So I think that the conversations can be difficult, but necessary.
Yeah, I guess I'd add that the National PTA has a website called the Smart Talk, and it's basically a set of guidelines for talking to your children about online safety in general and parameters for that. I think their principles is not necessarily focused on cyberbullying exclusively, but I think the principles involved are very relevant. We've worked with them on that. I went through that exercise with one of my daughters, and we filmed that conversation on YouTube, and it was a good exercise for me. I think one of the reasons why it's useful to have some sort of a framework like that to go through when you have that conversation is that you have like the added authority of like, here's a set of guidelines that people came up with. Let's talk through them. But maybe even more so, it's just, you don't want to find yourself in the situation, which I sometimes find myself in, that I wish I'd had this conversation with my kids, before the situation arose, right? Like you don't think of these things until it's too late, unfortunately, in many cases. And so just having these conversations early and going through something structured where you've had like professionals take a look at the major risks that are out there. Some of them you might not be aware of. Some of them might have slipped your mind, or you might have thought weren't as relevant as they are for your children as they are, can be quite helpful for these sorts of conversations.
Yeah, that Norton Lifelock National PTA resource, Smart Talk is fantastic. I can highly recommend that. Phil, any words of wisdom on how to talk to your kids about these things?
I'll say this. I think if you're a parent attending this right now, you're on the right path, right? You're taking it seriously. And this is something that, again, it's very easy to ignore, right? It's happening, often outside of our plain sight. And so being able to attend an event like this and having conversations even with, your other parents, other family members about how they're doing this. I mean, every family dynamic is a little bit different. But the recommendation that I would have is make sure that you're in the conversations, that you're comfortable having these types of conversations with those around you, because it is the type of thing that can happen, without everyone sort of recognizing what's going on. It's happening behind the screen, and a lot of it may be anonymous. So my recommendation for sure would be, attending an event like this is great, but don't be afraid to have conversations with other parents and family members.
John Haynes, anything you want to add?
No, not really. I think John and Phil and Kevin kind of summarized it nicely. It's a continuous effort, continuous conversation. Kids forget, they need the reminders, and doing it, having those conversations, before the crisis, super important. Keep it positive, and and like what John said, I couldn't agree more. And having kind of those family parameters established, and then letting those young people know that if they find themselves in a situation that they can call, they should call, and they know that they're going to support them because they're reaching out in a time of need.
We have a question here specifically about Snapchat, but I think we can generalize a little bit here too to other social media apps. How can kids block Snapchat messages without the bullying knowing that they are being blocked? The unfriend tends to just add gas to the fire that fuels the bully. So when somebody can see that you've unfriended them, which blocks them, then that can make things worse. Is what this parent is asking. Is there any better way to handle those situations? I think it depends on
one of the challenges is there isn't a universal standard for security and privacy settings with social media apps. So that makes it challenging. But I think starting with one of the most important things is only enabling messaging and profile viewing from known contacts. And so I think in this question, that scenario probably already exists, but I have to call it out because so many people just have their whole lives open to everybody. Anybody can send their kids messages. And so enabling that. And then there are certain apps, I don't know about Snap, but where you can essentially hide or ignore future messages without having to go through the active unfriending. But it really is application specific, and each of the settings are a bit different. I think the main thing is just going through and saying, what apps do I know my children are using and I'm allowing them to use? And that's only happened after you've actually been through those privacy and security settings and you're comfortable with the guardrails that are in place, usually and hopefully with some overall parental monitoring software or some sort of, the thing only sits in the living room where we're going to see everything that's being used on that type of scenario.
And with regard to Snapchat specifically, Lisa, I think we talked about this a month ago or so. We had some content from Snap on guide for parents, guide for Snapchat users. Maybe if Jen has that handy, she could drop it in the chat. I don't have it in front of me, sorry.
Yep, we can do that. She's probably scurrying to find it right now. There we go. John dropped it in there.
Yeah, I threw it. I only have permission for host and panelists, but there's the Snap specific safety tips. And that's the point. I mean, name your app. Most of these big companies now have entirely dedicated teams just to making the experience safe and secure and privacy minded for those that are willing to take the time to configure these things in a way that is meant for a child using them.
I think you said something really insightful there that we tend to gloss over. It's taking the time. I think we just get really busy with our everyday lives, and a lot of the technology is super quick to install, but sitting down and taking the time to configure it properly, to maybe get some parental monitoring software installed on your child's devices, things like that. It really is something you just have to prioritize and take the time for, because there are tools out there to help you. And then taking the time to have those conversations with your child. The one thing about parental monitoring software, I'll say from personal experience, is you may put it on your kids' devices, but you still have a responsibility to teach your kids responsible use of technology, because they're gonna borrow their friend's phone, they're gonna find a computer at a library, at school, at a friend's house, and so it's a little bit misguided to think that if you've kind of got things locked down on their devices or the devices that are in your home, that doesn't mean that your child is necessarily safe or using those things responsibly. So you still, even if you have things locked down, you still have to have those conversations. Parental monitoring doesn't cover you 100%. Any last few words? We have one person here asking where Madeline's place is. John, is it in Round Rock, Cedar Park? Where are you?
It's in Hutto, Texas. So
Hutto.
Yeah,
okay,
just
north of Austin.
North of Austin, yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate you, John, telling us your story today. It's heartbreaking. There's, but people will say who've lost a child will say there's nothing worse in the world than losing a child. And I applaud you and your wife for starting Madeline's Place and trying to see some good come out of your grief. I think that's a admirable effort, and I hope that there are children that have been positively affected by what you've done with your nonprofit.
I appreciate that, Lisa. I mean, I can share in terms of, that kind of tragedy. I can share that since we've started the organization, we know of 2 cases where a teen was trending into crisis mode, and somebody reached out to us, and we were able to help create a deflection point and get them back on track. So, yeah, we're obviously very happy about that.
Yeah, that's life altering. Good for you. Any parting thoughts from anyone?
Because I would just reiterate the importance of conversations. I think you don't want to, the conversations are vital. So, and you don't want to replace those with technology. So for example, if you think, well, I'm just going to secretly install a parental supervision tool on my child's device, you're going to start saying bad things, and then you're not going to have any good way to talk about them, right? So if you're going to use a tool like that, the conversation needs to happen first. Like, I'm worried about this situation. I think this is important. I feel as your parent, I'm going to give you this device, but here are the strings that are going to be attached. I'm going to be monitoring your communications, or, in a more simple setting, I'm going to be borrowing your phone once in a while, and I need to know your password, and you're going to just log in and check things out. And you need to be okay with that if you want to have a phone. And, I think those conversations are super important, because you could make things worse in the sense, like, you see the bad thing, but now you're like the secret spy who can't talk about it because you can't reveal how the conversations need to happen.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I have heard some parents say, well, what about my child's privacy? And my question for them is, Google and Facebook and everybody else knows exactly what your child is doing online. So I think you have a right to know as well as their parent. And it really is a matter of safety. Anybody else with a final comment? Phil?
Just advocate for location tracking services, both good and bad. It's one of the most important things is turn off the tracker for all these third parties and other things. But whether it's attaching to pictures, like don't have your children's location broadcast everywhere. Mm-hmm. So turn that stuff off. And then for families, it could be life changing. Having the fact that they have a phone, the fact that you can find them in a kidnapping or other type of situation, and actually having that set up ahead of time, is potentially just an incredible, positive that's come from technology. Again, if these things are set up right, but thinking through location tracking is a really important element that we didn't really cover.
Thanks for that. Phil, what were you going to say?
No, I just wanted to echo Kevin's comments about having those conversations and being proactive, right? Oftentimes we find ourselves in reactionary situations where, it's a lot more difficult to either have a conversation or, damage is already done. But being proactive and teaching good, cyber hygiene, all of these things are super important, and the reality is, like, in our world, technology is just starting to get more broadly adopted in schools, right? And this is not a trend. It's not just your child's iPhone that's being provided to them at home, but they're learning with these devices at school. It's become learning has become this sort of 24/7 thing in a sense as well. So we really are encouraging all of our students to become a lot more comfortable and vigilant with everything that's happening online. Report when something does happen, and talk to your parents, talk to your teachers, right? Talk to one of our tutors. It doesn't really matter, but if there's something taking place and you feel uncomfortable, you need to bring it up and you need to speak about it. So being proactive and trying to bring that discussion to the forefront before there's a crisis, I think, is really important. Again, teachers can play an important role in this as well. It's not just parents.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being with us today. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Kevin and John and the other John and Phil. And I want to remind everybody to visit StaySafeOnline.org. And I would encourage you to run a campaign with all of the resources that we've made available: social media graphics, infographics, articles, and other assets that we have available for download. They're all available for free. You can edit anything as you see fit, the articles or what have you. But hopefully we've given everybody a lot of resources here that if you want to run a campaign about cyberbullying to help parents, teachers, and kids in your community, we'd encourage you to do that. Thank you again for being with us.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.